Please be seated. So this morning, Jesus is back on home turf. He's crossed back to the familiar side of the sea, and the crowds have been waiting for him. Not only waiting, they have been growing. And so as soon as his sandals hit the land, he hears the voice of a powerful man, a man named Jairus, a leader in the synagogue. I imagine Jairus stood out from the throngs of people. I imagine he wore expensive clothes, and that maybe he was accompanied by assistants or even bodyguards. And this powerful man falls to his knees before Jesus and begs him to heal his sick 12-year-old daughter. And Jesus looks the man in the eyes and he sees him. He does not ask questions. He does not interrogate. He simply comes along with this man to see his daughter. They make their way through the sea of humanity, sweaty and smelly and hot. And I imagine to some people in that crowd, this moment would not have been surprising, but it may have been disappointing. Of course, this Jesus they had heard about, this preacher and healer who is like no one else, this man who seems to be of God in a way that cannot be explained, of course. He arrives here among the thousands looking to catch a glimpse of him and is immediately intercepted and taken away by a powerful man. In this sea of hope and need and wonder, Jesus notices this man. I imagine muttering, "Well, that's that. We had hoped for something different. We had hoped for the world to change. But obviously, this Jesus, like all of them that came before, is for the rich and the powerful, for the comfortable. There's nothing new here." But then, something happened. And I wonder how many people in that crowd saw it, noticed it. A woman who had been hemorrhaging, bleeding for 12 years, suffering from an undiscussable problem even today, had the faith to demonstrate that this Jesus is indeed something new. This woman whose name no one bothered to write down, something in her knew that in God's reign, no one's existence will be embarrassing or unspeakable or expendable. None of God's children will be unclean or untouchable as she would have been declared to be. And something in her knew that this Jesus was God. Something in this woman dared to have faith that this was something different. And so she reaches her hand out for those things that she knows to be true. She reaches her hand out for something more than just her own healing and restoration to physical health, but for nothing less than salvation for all of us. And she touches Jesus' cloak and feels her body change immediately. The heavy ache lift. And Jesus feels the energy of this moment, and he asks who touched his clothes. And the disciples don't want to take the time to figure it out. They want to continue their movement through the crowd. There's important work to do. And so, hearing this, the woman who had been so brave starts shaking, hardly believing she had done it, and she falls before Jesus in this pocket of stillness within the motion of the crowd, and she tells Jesus what she did, and he looks her in the eyes and he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And then Jesus hears a group of people push through the throngs and tell Jairus that his daughter has died. Did Jesus' turn in attention to one human being condemn another? Is there a cap on the amount of healing grace that can be handed out? Jesus says no. He takes up the gospel narrative from our unnamed woman and he heads to Jairus' house, and people laugh. They laugh at the thought that God's love is that big, so big as to overcome death, so big as to include us all. Jesus says, "Little girl, get up." And she does. She awakens from her slumber healed. 2 are healed. The daughter of a powerful man made humble in desperate grief, dropping to his knees before Jesus. And the marginalized woman made brave in desperate pain, reaching her hand toward Jesus. In God's reign, no one's existence will be embarrassing or unspeakable or expendable, and none of God's children will be unclean or untouchable. But we know that in our experience, people are deemed embarrassing, unspeakable, and expendable, untouchable and unclean, based on gender, how they present themselves, immigration status, ethnic background, the color of their skin, who they love, their religion, the size, shape, and condition of their body, where they live or lay their head, and on and on and on. And more of this from powerful men and women who do not question their own value, but find no worth in so many. And so we, among this crowd, in this place and time, might mutter, we had hoped for something different. We had hoped for the world to change. And I don't ever pretend to have great answers for navigating this anxious time with a whole lot of bad and scary news. But I do take from our story this morning a hint that we should always look closer to find the gospel narrative inside the overwhelming larger setting. Look for quiet signs of hope, signs of change, signs of God's promised reign. Look for just one person being healed in any sense of that word. Look for one person getting fed when she was hungry. One person being housed when she was not. Look for people who were once deemed embarrassing, unspeakable, and expendable, being respected, welcomed, and celebrated. Maybe not everywhere, but somewhere. And maybe help make those small things happen. Through the triage of day-to-day assistance, feeding, driving to medical appointments, helping cut through red tape to apply for public assistance programs, but also advocating and working for change that reduces suffering in the crowd. On the local, on-the-ground level where we can see it. And last, I wonder if we can dare to have the kind of faith that allows us to ask for healing. Like Jairus and the unnamed woman, to take our own needs, our own hopes, our own fears to God, and know that God will look us in the eyes and see us. And then to take these things to one another, to lean on each other. When I just can't find, when I don't see Jesus out there healing people, which happens, it happens. I always know that I have a friend who can. And I know you do too, because they're here. And when we find that friend, we've also found Christ. Always here, in a pocket of calm within the chaos.